I stood at the gate, my boarding pass shaking in my hand as whispers rippled behind me like jet wash. The terminal screens flickered overhead, casting a cold glow on faces too young to hide their doubt. "She won't last long," one of them said, not even bothering to lower his voice. After 7 years of rejection letters, after rebuilding engines just to afford flight school, after flying that aircraft through a wind shear emergency and landing it clean, they still didn't say my name with respect. Not until the captain did. Over the intercom. In first class. "All right. Before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from." The terminal reeked of overused carpet and burnt coffee. Evelyn Harris sat stiffly near Gate 34, her worn leather flight manual resting in her lap like an old friend. Around her, the Midwest Regional Airport buzzed with travelers clacking keyboards, rolling suitcases, and muttering into phones. But her world had narrowed to this seat, this hour, this moment before everything either fell apart or finally took off. She adjusted her blazer collar, smoothed the wrinkles in her slacks, and glanced at the mirrored window across from her. The reflection didn't lie. There were bags under her eyes, the kind no concealer could cover, and a strain in her posture that hadn't loosened since the letter arrived. "Congratulations, you've been selected to attend our elite commercial pilot training program." Her acceptance had come wrapped in disbelief, and now, here she was, 38, female, underfunded, and walking into a career people told her she should have chased 20 years ago. Her fingers traced the gold-embossed edge of the manual. Her father's initials were still scratched faintly into the back cover. That's when she heard it. "She won't last long." The voice was low but clear, cutting through the hum of the gate like a blade through silk. Evelyn turned just enough to see Mark Reynolds, senior captain, standing beside another pilot in a crisp Navy uniform. He wasn't whispering to her, but he didn't need to. The jab was meant to be heard. He didn't even glance her way after he said it. Just sipped his coffee and laughed softly at whatever smug reply the other pilot gave. She felt the prickle of eyes. Trainees in their fresh polos and corporate windbreakers were watching her. Some with lazy amusement, others with that barely concealed smirk that always followed women who were too late or too different to be taken seriously. Evelyn straightened her back. Didn't flinch. She'd learned long ago not to give people the performance they were looking for. Still, her hands clenched around the strap of her bag until her knuckles turned bone white. "Don't cry. Don't even blink." Her eyes shifted to the tarmac. A Delta connection flight taxied across the hazy fall afternoon, the heat shimmer blurring the world beyond the glass. She could smell jet fuel faintly in the air. Sharp, metallic, grounding. The sound of boarding announcements faded into a low drone. Her mind flicked, uninvited, to all the jobs she'd taken to get here. Waitress in a downtown diner, cashier at an auto parts store, and, most recently, a part-time mechanic fixing the very engines she was now training to command. No one saw that hustle. They only saw a woman pushing 40, trying to join a sky crowded with 20-something prodigies. She bit the inside of her cheek hard enough to taste blood. Let them laugh. Let them whisper. Her father's voice, faint but steady, echoed through the memory of long-ago road trips in his pickup. "People who haven't seen storms don't respect blue skies. You've seen storms, Evie." "Group 2 boarding now for Flight 1187 to Atlanta," came the announcement overhead. Evelyn rose, slinging her flight bag over one shoulder. Her heart hammered in her chest, but her steps were deliberate. She didn't look at Mark. Didn't need to. At the gate, the agent scanned her boarding pass with the same polite indifference reserved for people who didn't look like they belonged in first class. Evelyn offered no pleasantries. She walked down the jet bridge, heels quiet against the industrial carpet. Inside the plane, the scent of synthetic air and recycled lavender assaulted her senses. She found her seat near the front, settled in, and exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. From her window, the sky stretched wide and weightless. They could whisper all they wanted. She would answer in silence, in skill, in sky. As the aircraft began to taxi, Evelyn closed her eyes, the roar of engines vibrating in her bones. Prove them wrong. Evelyn unlocked the door to her apartment just past midnight. The hallway light flickered behind her, then died altogether as the door clicked shut. She didn't bother flipping on the lamp. Muscle memory guided her steps. 6 to the left. Drop the keys on the chipped kitchen counter. Bag on the stool that always leaned a little too far to one side. The silence inside felt heavier than usual. Outside the cracked window pane, Chicago's colder wind had begun to bite. It howled faintly through the weather-worn seal, whistling past old paint and rusted hinges like it had something to say. Evelyn pulled off her shoes, setting them beside a heating vent that hadn't worked right since April. Her knees cracked as she crouched to unzip her flight bag, fishing out the manual and a notepad layered with tabbed pages and handwritten notes. She laid it all on the kitchen table next to an untouched stack of rejection letters, the top one still open. "We regret to inform you." The rest blurred. She could recite them by heart. 37 rejections over 7 years. Different names, different seals. The same verdict. Not now. Not you. She sat down slowly. The chair groaned beneath her, as if tired too. The quiet gave way to memory. A tray crashing in a diner kitchen, grease on her hands from replacing a serpentine belt in a customer's truck. A 12-hour cashier shift behind bulletproof glass in a gas station on the south side. All of it for this. Not even for the wings yet. Just the chance to earn them. She picked up her father's flight badge from where it hung near the door. The gold was faded. His name almost rubbed smooth by years of thumb presses and grief. He'd never made it past private flying, but every time he talked about it, it sounded like poetry. "There's nothing holier than a sky you can command," he used to say, eyes distant as if he was already 1,000 feet above the ground. Evelyn held the badge tight, resting it against her forehead like a prayer. Then the radiator hissed violently, followed by a dull clunk. "Damn thing," she muttered. The noise stirred movement above. A thump. Then more thuds, followed by the creak of stairs. Moments later, a soft knock. Evelyn opened the door to find Helen, wrapped in a robe with cartoon penguins on it, holding a steaming mug. "I figured you wouldn't eat," Helen said, offering it without asking. "So I put extra milk in it. Good for the nerves." Evelyn took the mug but didn't drink. "I'm not nervous." Helen gave her a look. "You're pacing in your socks at midnight with pilot manuals spread like crime scene evidence. That's either nerves or a murder plot." That pulled the corner of Evelyn's mouth into the faintest grin. She motioned for Helen to come in. The two sat without words, the hum of the fridge the only sound between them. "You still think this is a mistake?" Helen asked softly, her eyes fixed on the wall where Evelyn had pinned a faded photo of her father beside a checklist of aviation milestones. Evelyn didn't answer right away. She looked down at her calloused hands, hands that had boxed groceries, lifted engine blocks, scrubbed diner floors. Now they were expected to guide metal through clouds. "I think," she started, voice barely above a whisper, "I've bet everything on a dream that people my age are supposed to have given up on." Helen sipped her tea, then said gently, "Then it's about time you start winning." Evelyn sat up straighter. She reached for the flight manual, flipped open to the technical section, and started reading aloud to herself. She repeated the engine codes, the aerodynamics equations, the emergency protocol for cabin decompression. Helen didn't leave. At 2:13 a.m., Evelyn was still reading. Her voice cracked but didn't stop. By 3 a.m., her fingers trembled from underlining too much. The heating shut off again, and she pulled her sleeves over her hands. The city outside was asleep. But Evelyn wasn't. She knew that at sunrise she'd step into a building full of men who already decided she wouldn't last the week. But for the first time in months, she didn't feel fear pressing down on her. Just the weight of purpose. The training center smelled like sterilized ambition. Lemon slick floors, cold metal railings, and air conditioning set just low enough to keep sweat from showing. Evelyn stepped inside the glass lobby, clutching her ID badge and course packet, eyes scanning the wall-mounted directory that glowed blue like a command screen. Rows of flight simulators lined the halls behind a wide security checkpoint. Their curved windows and glowing instrument panels gave off the faint hum of power, like beasts waiting to be tamed. She adjusted the strap on her bag and walked through the metal detector. The guard barely looked up. A young man in a Delta cap zipped past her, fist-bumping someone near the elevator. Two other trainees were comparing watch brands and laughing about the 3-hour burnout stories they'd heard from last year's class. Evelyn kept her eyes forward. She found Classroom C on the second floor. Rows of polished desks, a projector humming softly, and a sleek monitor displaying the airline's logo, Westridge Aviation, where tomorrow takes flight. Her assigned seat was near the back. Just as she slid into the chair, a voice floated in from the hallway. "Look who finally made it! Our honorary hobby flyer!" She didn't have to turn to know it was Mark Reynolds. He strolled in like he owned the oxygen in the room. Aviator sunglasses hooked on his collar, shirt pressed so tightly his epaulets looked starched onto his shoulders. He stopped just beside her desk and smiled like a man who'd never been told no in his life. "Careful in the simulators today," he said under his breath. "They don't come with a pause button for nerves." Evelyn looked up slowly. "Then it's good I didn't pack any." Mark's smile didn't falter, but his eyes narrowed slightly, enough to let her know she'd scratched something beneath his polished surface. Across the room, a blonde woman with high cheekbones and an ironed name tag, Claire Summers, watched the exchange. She raised an eyebrow, then looked away, bored or amused. It was hard to tell. Daniel Ortiz entered with a brisk stride, clipboard in hand. "Seats. Quiet," he said, voice all steel and caffeine. "Today, we learn how to crash." A few chuckles echoed. Evelyn didn't join in. The rest of the morning blurred into safety briefings, cockpit schematics, and instructor war stories. Evelyn scribbled notes feverishly, trying to keep pace with acronyms and control systems her fingers hadn't touched in years. But when the afternoon came, it was time for the real test. The simulator room was darker than she expected, each full-motion rig glowing like a cockpit torn from a Boeing 737. Evelyn climbed into the left seat of her assigned unit, hands already sweating, heart thudding like rotor blades in her chest. The screen lit up. Scenario 1. Unexpected turbulence. Descent required. The room hushed as everyone turned toward their screens. A voice buzzed in her headset. "Take control." She reached for the yoke, and everything moved too fast. Lights flashed. Wind shear warning. Rapid descent. Altimeter dropping like a stone. Evelyn tried to stabilize, but her grip was too tight, her breath shallow. She overcorrected. The plane banked too hard left. A virtual stall warning blared in her ears. "Too aggressive," Daniel's voice came through, calm but clipped. Evelyn swallowed hard, tried again, eyes darting between dials and screen. She managed to stabilize at the last moment, but the aircraft's trajectory remained jagged and inconsistent. The simulation paused. On the instructor monitor, a red incomplete glowed beside her name. From across the room, she heard it. Just a whisper. "Told you. She won't last long." She turned her head. Mark was already looking away. Daniel approached her simulator quietly and handed her a folded printout. "Notes," he said. "You were too reactive, but you didn't panic. That matters more than you think." Evelyn looked up at him, surprised. He didn't smile, but his eyes held something close to belief. Everyone else filed out by 6. Evelyn stayed. She reloaded the turbulent scenario. Then again, and again. The simulator's movements tossed her until her muscles ached. She adjusted trim tabs, tried different descent angles, whispered checklists to herself like prayers. Each run got smoother, tighter, more intentional. By the time the janitor turned off the overhead lights, she was still inside, back straight, hands firm on the controls. The propeller spun like a blade, daring her to flinch. Evelyn stood on the edge of the tarmac at Hangar 9, headset in hand, heart hammering harder than it had during any simulator drill. The morning sun was harsh and unfiltered, casting her shadow long and trembling against the concrete. The aircraft was smaller than she expected. A Cessna 172, white with faded blue striping, the kind of plane that smelled more like rubber and oil than anything mechanical should. It looked harmless enough, even charming, but when she placed her hand on the cold fuselage, it buzzed with something that felt alive. Pre-flight's good. Fuel, pressure, hydraulics. Check. She muttered aloud, the words automatic, but her voice cracked halfway through. Her fingers trembled as she zipped her windbreaker up to her chin and climbed into the cockpit. Alone. No instructor beside her, no clipboard, no second set of hands. This was it. She slid her checklist onto her lap and powered up the instrument panel. Lights blinked to life. The yoke felt heavier than it had in simulation, as if it knew she hadn't earned it yet, as if it was judging her. A light breeze rattled the glass. Just another drill, she told herself. But the silence was different here. No chatter. No Daniel feeding her notes. No Mark sneering from the corner. Just the hum of the engine beneath her, the tick of her nerves, and a sky that didn't care who she was. She took a long breath, pressed the mic button. Tower, this is student pilot Harris requesting takeoff clearance. Runway 17. Cleared for takeoff, came the reply. Good luck up there. Her fingers twitched on the throttle. Now or never. She eased it forward. The plane surged ahead. Her stomach dropped as the wheels left the ground. She'd taken off dozens of times in simulators. But this wasn't a screen. This was air. This was gravity bartering with her nerves. The yoke pulled back harder than she expected. Her climb angle was too steep. The stall horn chirped once, sharp and shrill. She cursed, adjusted. The wings leveled. Barely. Abort. Now. You're not ready. The thought hit her like ice water. Her hand hovered over the radio, but something deeper, older, broke through. A memory. She was 16 again. Behind the wheel of her father's pickup in an empty parking lot, knuckles white on the steering wheel. The old man beside her had just lit a cigarette and said, "Fear's not an engine, Evie. You don't let it drive." Back in the sky, Evelyn swallowed the rising panic. Just fly the damn thing. She focused on the horizon, lined up her heading, and forced her breathing into rhythm with the engine. Her eyes flicked to the altimeter, then to the compass. Her grip loosened a little. The plane steadied. The clouds parted slightly, revealing farmland like a patchwork quilt below, gold and brown and green. The hum of the propeller dulled into background noise. She flew, not perfectly, but present, in command. 30 minutes passed before she turned the aircraft back toward the airfield. The descent felt like an exam in itself. Her flare was late. The rear wheels bumped harder than they should have, but she stayed on centerline, corrected with grit, and coasted to a stop. The wheels kissed concrete, and for the first time, she smiled. Not for long, but enough. The buzz started as soon as she stepped into the briefing room. It wasn't loud. That would have been too easy to call out. Instead, it was the kind of whisper you feel before you hear, like static brushing across skin. 3 more weeks, tops, someone murmured behind a coffee cup. She can't even land without chewing the runway. I heard she's already been flagged for review. Evelyn sat down at her usual seat in the back row, sliding her pen from behind her ear. Her jaw clenched as she kept her eyes on the whiteboard where Daniel's neat bullet points listed today's flight scenarios. Her name wasn't on it. Again. Claire Summers walked in a minute later, glancing at Evelyn just long enough to register the association, then took a seat across the aisle instead of beside her like she had on day one. Message received. Daniel stepped up to the front, calling the class to attention. Sim room rotation posted. You'll be handling rapid descent protocols this afternoon. Time to see if your brains catch up to your instincts. They broke for individual prep sessions. Evelyn walked down the hallway toward the simulators, binder in hand, trying to block out the overlapping hum of gossip and forced laughter. Claire didn't speak to her, didn't even make eye contact as she passed. In Simbay 4, the lights were already dimmed. Evelyn slid into the left seat, focused on setting up the pre-flight parameters. Mark Reynolds stood near the instructor console, arms folded, that same smirk curling his lips like a habit he didn't know how to break. As the sim began, Evelyn was barely halfway through her initial checklist when he interrupted, loud enough for everyone across the room to hear. Slower than a Sunday driver. Maybe let the autopilot do the thinking for you? The other trainees chuckled. Evelyn didn't respond. Her hands moved steadily, flipping switches, adjusting trim. Mark circled behind her like a vulture. Your reaction time's about 3 seconds behind the curve. In real life, that's the difference between a safe descent and a mountain obituary. She still said nothing, but her pen, after the drill, scratched fiercely across the bottom of her notebook. Reynolds, again, public undermining. Noted. Date, time, witnesses, entire Bay 4. After the session, she caught up with Daniel near the stairwell. His clipboard was tucked under one arm, a black coffee in the other. Can I ask you something off the record? She said quietly. He raised an eyebrow, then nodded for her to follow him into the adjacent hallway. I can take criticism, she said, but this isn't that. What he's doing, it's deliberate. Daniel took a sip of coffee, studied her. It is? That surprised her. She expected dismissal, or worse, indifference. I've seen it before, he said. Guys like him, they gatekeep the sky. They don't care what you know. They care who they think you are, and they've already made their decision. So what? Just deal with it? No. His voice dropped. But understand this. This industry will eat your pride first, then your patience, then your sleep. You want to make it? Don't take the bait. Outfly it. She nodded, the answer both comforting and brutal. That night she skipped dinner. Again. Instead, she stayed in the practice lab well past curfew, hunched over emergency charts and fuel balance equations, muttering acronyms until her throat burned. Her knuckles ached from clutching the yoke during sim resets. Her body was running on caffeine, cheap granola bars, and grit. By midnight she was shaking, not from fear, but sheer depletion. The fatigue crept in first as sloppiness, then as self-doubt. What if they're right? What if I'm just holding everyone back? She pushed the thought away. Hard. But the cracks had begun to show. The locker room was quiet, except for the hum of an ancient vending machine and the occasional distant clang of a simulator door closing. Evelyn sat on the bench near her locker, her shoulders slumped forward, eyes fixed on the floor like it had answers she'd missed in her training manual. The fluorescent light above flickered slightly, adding a stuttering rhythm to the silence. She wiped her face with the edge of her sleeve, but the tear had already marked its path. She didn't sob. She didn't have the energy for it. What came out were soundless, trembling breaths that made her chest rise and fall like faulty hydraulics. Her notes were crumpled beside her, pages dog-eared and ink smudged. Her hand had started cramping from writing incident logs, tracking every whispered jab and public humiliation like a legal record she wasn't sure anyone would ever read. She hadn't meant to break here, but fatigue, sabotage, and isolation had chipped away at her all week. And in this dim, tiled room, alone, she finally cracked. Until she wasn't alone. The door creaked open. Evelyn tensed, swiping at her eyes with a roughness that left her blinking. She didn't look up. Footsteps. Light. Familiar. Then a voice. "You forgot to lock the door." Evelyn turned slowly. Claire stood near the entrance, arms folded, her usually perfect bun starting to loosen at the edges. There was no smugness in her face today. No smirk. Just something that looked almost unsure. "I thought everyone was gone," Evelyn said hoarsely, her voice scraped thin. Claire stepped farther in, her footsteps deliberate but unhurried. She didn't sit. Just leaned against the row of lockers across from her. "I wasn't looking for you," Claire added. "I came back for my phone. Then I heard—" She trailed off, gesturing vaguely toward Evelyn's tear-streaked face without saying the word. Weakness. Breakdown. Defeat. All things Evelyn had worked too hard to hide. Claire exhaled through her nose, eyes scanning the floor, then the door, as if checking to make sure no one else would overhear. "Look," she said finally, voice quieter. "You're not crazy. About Reynolds." Evelyn blinked. "What?" Claire hesitated, then nodded. "I've seen him do it before. Usually not this obsessively. But he's been pulling strings for years. He's old-school toxic. And he knows the system will cover him if he keeps it subtle." Evelyn's heart thudded. "Why are you telling me this now?" Claire looked away, jaw working like she was chewing something back. "Because I saw your name on the red line of Valtrac," she said. "That's deliberate. That doesn't happen by accident. And someone should have said something." Evelyn stared at her. The admission, the shift, the sudden empathy. It felt disorienting. "You could have warned me days ago." "I could have," Claire admitted, finally sitting on the bench across from her. "But I was trying to stay out of it. You're not the only one being watched." A silence settled between them, thick with things neither had said. Then Claire added, "You're not the only woman here who's been called a distraction before even touching the yoke." Evelyn let out a breath that was half laugh, half ache. "Feels more like a target." Claire smiled faintly. "Sometimes both." For the first time, the walls didn't feel like they were closing in. Evelyn leaned forward and reached into her flight bag. She pulled out her crumpled notes, the ones she'd been compiling for weeks. Names, dates, quotes. A timeline of every underhanded remark and calculated sabotage. Claire's eyes widened slightly as she flipped through a few pages. "You've been building a case." "More like a defense file," Evelyn said. "In case I wash out, I want the truth to live somewhere." Claire set the pages down gently. "Maybe," she said carefully. "It doesn't have to be a defense. Maybe it's ammo." Evelyn looked up at her. "You saying you'll back me up?" "I'm saying—" Claire paused, then offered a hand. "We fly better with two." Evelyn hesitated, then took it. Not a friendship. Not yet. But something stronger than silence. The thunderstorm simulation was already mid-chaos when Evelyn slid into the seat. Lightning cracked across the curved simulator screens in stark flashes of white. Wind speeds on the readout climbed past tolerances, and the simulated turbulence jostled the rig violently enough that a pen rolled off the console and hit the floor with a dull clink. She was late by 40 seconds. Daniel's nod from the instructor console said go anyway. Evelyn tightened her harness and took the controls. "Scenario is live," came the voice over the headset. "Approach vector compromised. You're running low on fuel and descending through crosswinds. Let's see it." Her fingers gripped the yoke, but her shoulders locked. The soundscape, howling wind, thunder, cockpit alarms, was too real. She adjusted flaps, scanned the altimeter. Her heartbeat competed with the stall warning in her ears. Just breathe. But something in her brain refused to sync with her body. She hesitated. And then, Jesus. Is she trying to land or pray? Mark's voice cut across the sim bay, sharp and mocking. Laughter rippled from two of the younger trainees. Evelyn's hands tensed on the throttle. Her breath shortened. The simulated storm worsened. Pitch angles swerved. The horizon line bucked. Do something. Move. Move. Still frozen? Then. Crash! The simulator jolted violently as the mock landing failed. Evelyn flinched. The screen froze on a fiery wreck. Her name flashed in red. Daniel powered down the sim and stepped toward the cockpit door, lips pressed thin. Everyone take 5, except Harris. The room emptied quickly, laughter echoing down the hallway like loose rivets shaking in her skull. Daniel waited until the door shut behind the last trainee. What the hell happened in there? Evelyn didn't answer. She couldn't. Her mouth was dry, her pulse a war drum behind her ribs. You were late. You froze. That wasn't fear of failure. That was surrender. He crossed his arms, watching her carefully. You need to ask yourself if you want this life. Really want it. She met his gaze. Her voice was quiet but even. I do. Then show me something, Harris. Because right now the wind's chewing you up. He left her there in silence. The sim room emptied by 7. Evelyn stayed. The janitor passed once and didn't even ask this time. She loaded the storm scenario again. Her hands still shook. Her brain still pulsed with noise. But she flew it. Then she flew it again. And again. The 3rd time she crashed earlier. The 4th time, she pulled out too late. The 5th time, she clipped a building on final approach. By the 6th attempt, her hands were numb from tension. The simulator cabin stank of plastic and sweat. She cracked her neck, rubbed her eyes, and reset the system once more. She didn't see the time until the screen flickered off. 3:11 a.m. Her body begged for sleep, but her mind was worse. That failure, Mark's voice, Daniel's disappointment, the laughter, looped in her head like a black box recorder playing back her death in real time. She stepped out into the cold hallway, legs wobbling under her. Then her phone buzzed. Helen! She picked up without saying a word. Evie? Helen's voice was soft, thick with sleep. You okay? Evelyn leaned against the wall, eyes closing. No, she said. Pause. You want me to come over? No, She exhaled. I froze. I choked. They all saw it. Helen was quiet for a beat, then said, You ever hear of Chuck Yeager? Evelyn blinked. What? First guy to break the sound barrier. You know what he did the day before? Evelyn shook her head, forgetting Helen couldn't see her. He broke 2 ribs, didn't tell anyone, flew anyway, because he knew that machine didn't care about pain, only control. Helen paused, then added, You already broke the ribs, Evie. Might as well break the damn sound barrier. Evelyn didn't say anything, but the tears that came weren't from fear this time. They were from fury. The scenario read, Double engine failure, low altitude emergency landing, wind shear active. Evelyn read it twice, then again. Her hands were cold despite the stuffy heat in the simulator bay. Her stomach was empty, save for black coffee and adrenaline. It was her 3rd high-risk sim in 2 days. Another red track drill. Another setup where failure wasn't hypothetical. It was expected. Claire stood by the observer screen, arms crossed. She gave Evelyn a small nod. Not warm, but solid. Present. Support without spectacle. Evelyn climbed into the left seat and secured her harness. The moment the sim powered up, the cockpit buzzed with chaos. Altitude dropping. Engine 2 gone. Engine 1 sputtering. Trees on final approach. Wind pushing the virtual plane like a kid throwing a paper glider. Don't fight the chaos. Fly through it. She ran her checks fast, sharp, hands calm, eyes focused. The plane dipped hard right. She corrected with a gentle rudder tap, not a yank. Fire in engine 1, prop feathered. The voice over comms sounded distant. She didn't flinch. Pulled throttle back, adjusted pitch, read her glide angle. Her palms were damp, her mind crystal clear. Declare emergency, full flaps, look for flat terrain, trust the yoke, trust your hands. Daniel watched from the instructor console, arms folded. His eyes didn't move. Not once. The altimeter dropped past 1,000 feet. Wind shear slammed the left wing. Evelyn leaned into it, adjusted trim, countered the spin with instinct that wasn't written in any manual. She locked eyes with the virtual horizon and whispered, "Not today." The simulated landing came fast and brutal. No runway, just an open stretch of field. She kept the nose up. Let the wheels take the first hit. No bounce, no roll. Just the shuddering halt of survival. The simulator went silent. And then, complete system shutdown. Screen black. She pulled off her headset slowly, heart thudding so hard it echoed in her ears. Outside the rig, the room was quiet. No laughter, no side comments. Claire blinked, then gave one clap. Just one, then two more. Subtle, but real. A few other trainees, ones who hadn't even made eye contact with Evelyn last week, glanced at each other. One of them muttered, "Damn." Daniel finally stepped forward. He tapped the side of the simulator once and looked at Evelyn. "That's the first clean emergency field landing I've seen this year." Evelyn's lips parted slightly. "You mean—" "I mean," Daniel cut in, "you didn't fly that like someone who's trying to survive training. You flew that like someone who knows they belong in the air." He held her gaze. "Good work, Harris." It was the first public praise she'd gotten from him. It hit harder than she expected. As she stepped out of the rig, Mark walked past the back of the room. He said nothing. Didn't even stop. But his jaw was tight, and his hand squeezed the binder he was carrying like it was a stress ball. "You saw that, didn't you?" For the first time, Evelyn didn't need to hear his words to know what he was thinking. She moved to the back of the room where Claire waited, arms still crossed. Her voice was low. "That landing was clean." Evelyn raised a brow. "You surprised?" "No," Claire replied. "But they were." Evelyn glanced around. The room felt different. Warmer, somehow. Or maybe just less sharp. Even the silence had shifted. Not victory. Not yet. But no longer invisible. Evelyn reached her locker 5 minutes before the written exam. She spun the combination, yanked the handle, and froze. Empty. Her flight manual, tabbed, dog-eared, crammed with notes, formulas, checklists, and emergency protocol drills, was gone. She blinked once, twice, checked the floor, the neighboring lockers, the bench. Nothing. A slow burn crept up her spine. Her backup flashcards weren't there either. Not even the annotated exam sheets she'd made last night over cold Chinese takeout. She stepped back, eyes scanning the hallway. Claire appeared beside her like a shadow. "I saw him," she said quietly. Evelyn turned. "Reynolds," Claire clarified. 15 minutes ago, standing right here, looking through your locker. He didn't see me coming around the corner." Evelyn felt her chest tighten. "Did you say anything?" Claire shook her head. "He walked off too fast." "You still have time to report it." Evelyn looked down the hallway toward the exam room. "There is no time." A beat passed. Claire reached into her own bag and handed Evelyn a folded sheet. "It's not your manual, but it's my annotated checklist from last week's drill. Better than nothing." Evelyn hesitated, then took it. Her fingers brushed Claire's. They were warm, steady. Inside the exam room, Evelyn sat at the far left table. The test packet in front of her seemed to blur at the edges. fuel sequencing algorithms, approach plate interpretation, weight and balance calculations. She stared, blinking hard, willing herself to focus. Her usual rhythm, read, recall, write, was fractured. Second-guessing crept in. She circled one answer, then scratched it out. Chose another, then changed it back. The clock ticked louder than usual. She skipped 3 questions. Guessed 2 more. Pull it together. Breathe. Fight back later. But pass now. When she handed the packet in, her hands were shaking. Daniel found her 2 hours later in the stairwell near the simulator bay, where she'd gone to hide her growing panic. "You missed questions I know you know," he said, holding her exam paper. "Hydraulics transfer capacity, fuel dumping limits, dead reckoning protocols." Evelyn didn't meet his eyes. "Do you want to tell me what's going on?" "My manual went missing," she said. "This morning, right before the test." "Did you report it?" She shook her head. "What's the point? There's no proof. Just whispers." Daniel looked at her for a long moment, then handed the paper back. "You passed. Barely. But this," he tapped the top corner, "isn't how you fly. This is how you sink." "I know," Evelyn said quietly, "and you don't strike me as the sinking type." She took the paper, folded it, and tucked it into her binder, not planning on it. That evening, she waited until the sim center was empty. Then she sat at her usual desk in the far study bay and opened a blank notebook. On the cover, she wrote one word: sabotage. Then she began documenting, in detail, every incident, every microaggression, every time Mark had joked in public. The locker, the red track schedule, the comments, the smirks, the paper trail. She'd avoided this level of confrontation before, not out of fear, but strategy. But that restraint was over now. They won't believe whispers, but they'll have to believe the paper. 2 nights later, Claire slid into the desk across from her, glanced at the growing file. "You're building a war chest," she said. Evelyn didn't look up. "He's not going to stop, so I won't either." Claire hesitated, then reached into her coat pocket and dropped a folded slip of paper on the desk. "I heard something." Evelyn opened the paper, typed, brief, internal memo. "Ongoing performance audit, Captain Mark Reynolds. Pattern of procedural deviation. Under review." Her breath caught. She read it again. "Where did you get this?" "Friend in scheduling," Claire said. "They're investigating him for unsafe flying. It's under the radar for now." Evelyn's fingers tightened around the page. "So he's not just going after me. He's covering himself." Claire nodded. "If your notes line up with their findings..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. They both knew what it meant. This wasn't just retaliation anymore. This was leverage. The wind off the tarmac had turned sharp, slicing through Evelyn's jacket like it meant to test her skin. She stood just outside the training center, memo still folded tight in her palm like a threat she hadn't decided whether to deliver. Mark Reynolds. Under investigation. Not just a bully. Not just a saboteur. A liability in the air. Her heart thudded with something she couldn't name. Part fury, part opportunity, part nausea. If she turned him in now, with her own documentation, it could bury him, or bury her. Inside, the simulators buzzed to life for the afternoon rotations. She was up next. High-altitude decompression drill, one of the most complex scenarios they'd face before real-world clearance. She stared down at the folded memo again. It almost hummed in her hands. Claire found her outside the prep room, chewing on the edge of her pen, face unreadable. "You haven't turned it in yet." Evelyn shook her head slowly. Claire didn't look surprised. "I get it. You're scared he'll come after you harder." "I'm not scared of him," Evelyn replied. "I'm scared the system will back him." Claire leaned against the wall beside her. They might. That's the part no one warns you about. Evelyn glanced sideways. You still think I shouldn't report it? I think you should fly better than him, Claire said, so that when the hammer drops, no one can say you were bitter. Just better. Daniel pulled her aside later that evening in the hallway between briefing rooms. I heard a rumor, he said simply. Evelyn's breath caught. About what? That you're compiling something. A file. About Reynolds. She didn't answer, didn't deny it. Daniel looked tired. He rubbed his temple with 2 fingers. You're not wrong to do it. But understand this. Flying's not just skill. It's politics. It's who vouches for you in the right rooms when you're not there. Are you telling me to stop? I'm telling you, Daniel said carefully, that careers have disappeared over less, even when they were right. Evelyn didn't speak, just stared at him, letting the warning sink in like a slow storm cloud. Fly the drills, Daniel said at last. Let the sky do your talking for now. Back at home, the apartment felt colder than usual. Helen knocked around 9, holding 2 microwave burritos and a cheap bottle of red wine. You look like someone deciding between murder and martyrdom, she said, dropping the food on the table. Don't. Eat first. Evelyn didn't laugh, just leaned back, exhaustion clinging to her. I have proof, she said. I could destroy his career. Helen poured the wine into chipped mugs. Or he could destroy yours. I don't care about revenge. Sure you do, Helen said softly. But I know you care more about finishing what you started. Evelyn ran her hands down her face. So what? I wait? Helen pushed a burrito toward her. No. You win first. Win in the cockpit. Make it so obvious that no one can spin your motive. Then when you bring the truth, they'll have no choice but to listen. At 4:40 a.m., Evelyn stood in front of the hangar for her solo cross-country test flight. 3 hours, 3 cities, 1 chance. The sky was still black, just beginning to smear with indigo. Fog clung low to the tarmac. Her breath came out in visible puffs. Claire handed her the updated flight plan. You prepped for altitude shift over Lake Michigan? Evelyn nodded. I'm prepped for everything. Claire raised an eyebrow. Even sabotage? Evelyn gave the faintest smirk. Especially sabotage. She walked to the plane. No instructor, no observer. Just her, the sky, and a clock that didn't care how hard she'd worked to be here. She climbed into the cockpit, buckled in, and pulled out the laminated checklist she'd rebuilt from memory. Then, for the first time since her father died, she whispered out loud, I've got this. Evelyn tightened the strap on her headset as the hangar doors rolled open, letting in a gust of wind that didn't care about nerves or reputations. She stepped up into the aircraft, a sleek 2-seat trainer with newer tech than most of the rigs she'd flown. Today wasn't a simulation. It was the final solo exam, the culmination of months of sweat, sabotage, and silence. And in the right seat, clipboard already in hand, sat Mark Reynolds. His aviators were perched on his forehead, eyes unreadable. He didn't greet her, didn't nod, just said flatly, Takeoff checklist, clock starts now. Evelyn's throat went dry. She moved quickly, adjusting switches, checking gauges, verifying flap settings, every motion deliberate, mechanical. She felt him watching, not like an instructor, but like a hunter tracking for weakness. Tower. This is student pilot Harris requesting clearance. Runway 18. Cleared for departure. Good luck. The tower's words barely finished before Mark muttered, You'll need it. Evelyn pushed the throttle forward. The aircraft surged ahead, tires humming against the asphalt until they lifted into sky. The air was smooth at first, almost calm. She climbed clean, adjusted trim, called out headings. and followed the exam route over patchy farmland and open blue. Then Mark started talking. Simulate engine flameout, right now. Evelyn blinked. Mid-climb? You're too slow. You're dead already. Fix it. She flicked switches, feathered the propeller, called out her altitude drop. Her hands moved fast, but her heart slammed even faster. Altitude's unstable. You're losing the horizon. Correcting pitch, she said through clenched teeth. Not fast enough. He barked the words over the headset like gunshots. No instruction, no coaching, just pressure. Okay. Hydraulics failure, now. Let's see if you crash or just cry. Evelyn's hands shook. The aircraft dipped slightly left. She corrected. Trimmed. Then leveled off. Emergency checklist initiated, she said aloud. By memory. Mark didn't respond. She flew the next 20 minutes in near silence, sweat pooling between her shoulder blades, legs locked, brain burning through every known failure protocol she'd memorized since the day her acceptance letter arrived. Near the final descent point, Mark leaned toward the console and pressed a button. The engine stuttered. The gauges flickered. Fuel feed dropout, he said. It wasn't in the planned drill. Is that even part of this test? Evelyn asked, tightening her grip. It is now, Mark replied, smirking. For a second she hesitated. Then, she flew. Emergency landing checklist, field in sight. Mayday call logged. She bled altitude, monitored wind direction, adjusted flaps, and took a shallower glide than she ever had before. She could feel her heartbeat in her teeth, but her hands were steady. The touchdown was hard, but clean. The plane skidded along the makeshift runway. Full stop. Mark clicked his pen, said nothing. Back in the debriefing room, Daniel waited. Mark handed him the exam form, already filled in. She made errors, Mark said. Sloppy descent, overcompensated trim, and she was too slow on the second emergency. Daniel flipped through the form, then turned to Evelyn. You want to respond? She met every checklist, every altitude target, every emergency call-out was by the book, Evelyn said. And I know that fuel dropout wasn't standard. Daniel looked at Mark. Is that true? Mark didn't answer, just stared at a spot on the wall. Daniel put the exam form down. I observed the tail end from the tower. I saw how she handled it. He turned to Evelyn. You passed. The word hit like an airbag to the chest. She blinked. What? Daniel nodded. More than passed. That landing, that was textbook under stress. Mark's jaw twitched. She got lucky. No, Daniel said quietly. She got good. Outside, the wind had picked up. Evelyn stepped into the cold, pulling her jacket tighter. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but release. Mark pushed past her in the hallway, shoulders stiff. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. She'd won this flight. But the war? Still airborne. The conference room was too bright. The fluorescent ceiling lights buzzed overhead like a reminder. This wasn't some dramatic hangar ceremony, no sweep of patriotic music or slow-motion salute. Just laminated chairs, an off-white podium, and a platter of lukewarm bagels sweating under plastic wrap. Still, Evelyn sat straighter than she ever had. The polished silver wings rested in a velvet-lined box on the front table. 5 others were receiving theirs too, each called up alphabetically. Her last name meant she'd wait. Mark stood by the window, arms folded, pretending to scroll his phone. His jaw clenched every time applause broke out. He hadn't looked at her once. Daniel stepped forward when her name was finally called. Evelyn Harris, he said, his voice calm and even. Exemplary performance under stress conditions, consistent technical improvement, tactical precision under pressure. He didn't elaborate, didn't flash a smile, but his words rang louder than any speech. Evelyn rose, walking to the front with steady steps. The wings were cool in her palm. She didn't smile, didn't wave. Instead, she looked up at the ceiling for a moment longer than she needed to, then quietly stepped back. Back in her seat, the applause died down quickly. Not everyone clapped. Some had never expected her to make it this far. A few still didn't believe she belonged. Evelyn could hear them even when they weren't speaking. Whispers behind clipboards, the tight-lipped glances, the side eyes too polite to be called out. But she didn't need noise. She needed air. After the ceremony, Claire found her near the vending machines outside the break room. She held 2 small paper cups of the worst coffee in the building. "I figured this is as close to a champagne toast as we get," Claire said, handing one over. Evelyn took it, the cup warm against her sore fingers. "Do I finally get a real congratulations?" Claire's expression softened. "You earned this, Harris. All of it." They sipped in silence. Then Claire added, "You know, I used to think you were going to crack." "I almost did," Evelyn replied. Claire smiled faintly. "You didn't." Mark passed them minutes later, walking briskly toward the instructor's offices. He didn't glance their way, didn't stop. But his shoulders were tight. Tighter than usual. The facade was wearing thin. Claire tilted her head. "He knows he lost this round." "Then he's planning the next one," Evelyn said flatly. Inside her backpack, the folder labeled sabotage had grown thicker. Timestamps, recreated training logs, witness observations. Even the internal memo Claire had risked sharing. She hadn't turned it in yet, not because she doubted its power, because timing was everything. Evelyn walked back into the now empty conference room. She sat in the last row and opened the velvet box again. Her pilot's wings glinted in the cheap light, 2 metal feathers holding up a shield, small and weighty all at once. She ran her thumb along the edge, remembering hands that once smelled like grease and gasoline. Her father's hands, lifting her into a makeshift cockpit built from plywood and dreams. "You'll fly one day, Evie, higher than me." He'd said it in the kind of voice that didn't ask for belief. It declared it. She closed the box and pressed it gently to her chest, her eyes closing just long enough to feel the moment stretch around her. A few more battles to fight, but one promise already fulfilled. Back in her apartment that night, Evelyn slid the sabotage folder behind a panel in the closet where it would stay. For now. The storm hadn't passed, but she was ready to fly through it. The jet bridge smelled like lemon disinfectant and nerves. Evelyn stepped onto the aircraft with her crew bag slung over one shoulder. Her fresh-issued ID badge clipped to her uniform. Her shoes gleamed, her palms didn't. Flight 1423. Regional route, Atlanta to Denver, her first real commercial flight. And Mark Reynolds was already in the left seat. "Captain." He didn't turn as she entered the cockpit, just flipped a switch on the overhead panel and said, "Welcome to the big leagues." His voice was flat. Not warm, not cruel, just practiced. She dropped her bag, slid into the co-pilot's chair, and began her own checklist. The cockpit was narrow, modern, tight like a secret. She could feel every vibration of the systems powering up through her spine, the hum of pressurization, the thunk of cargo doors sealing, the low murmur of flight attendants prepping the cabin. She recited switch positions in her head as her fingers moved. Batteries, avionics, fuel pumps, hydraulic systems. Behind them, she could hear it. The whispers. "She's flying today? That Harris woman? Hope she doesn't break down midair." The flight attendant leaned in briefly to place 2 cups of black coffee in the side tray. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Mark took a sip and didn't look at Evelyn as he said, "Word travels fast, doesn't it?" She didn't answer. "You know," he added casually, flipping through the flight plan, "when I heard they assigned you here, I thought maybe someone upstairs had a twisted sense of humor. Maybe they just like symmetry, Evelyn said, not looking up. Mark chuckled, low and dry. Passengers began boarding. The chime of seatbelt signs, rolling suitcases, that odd, quiet bustle that filled the cabin just before takeoff. Evelyn saw a few heads peek toward the cockpit as they passed, curious, assessing. A woman co-pilot wasn't a novelty anymore. But an older rookie? One with no airline pedigree? That still turned heads. She felt their gazes like weight on her collar. She took a breath and stared forward. She could hear her father's voice, faint but anchoring. The plane doesn't care about their expectations. Neither should you. Mark leaned back in his seat, eyes still on his console. Tell me, Harris, still keeping your little diary on me? Evelyn's jaw tensed. Still giving me things to write down? His smirk faded, if only slightly. The last passengers boarded. The door sealed. They taxied out in silence. The tower cleared them for takeoff. Your leg, Mark said, motioning to the controls. Show me what all that training was good for. Evelyn's hands moved confidently over the throttle. Her voice was steady as she called out, thrust set, airspeed alive. Rotate. The nose lifted. They climbed into the sky. For a few minutes it was quiet, just the hum of turbines, the readouts ticking upward, the cloud line blurring past the windshield. Then, bang. The left engine coughed. A sharp vibration rippled through the fuselage. A jolt. Lights flickered. A red warning blinked to life on the panel. ENG-1, oil pressure drop. Mark sat up. That's not a drill. No, Evelyn said, her voice tight but clear. It's not. Alarms rang out. Passengers gasped in the cabin. One of the flight attendants stumbled slightly down the aisle. Evelyn scanned. Fuel flow, stable. Hydraulics, holding. Engine 2, normal. But engine 1, bleeding fast. Mark hesitated. 1 second, then 2. It was too long. Evelyn reached across, punched the isolation switches, adjusted bleed air, feathered the throttle. I'm declaring emergency, she said, already grabbing the comm. Flight 1423, engine failure, requesting immediate return vector. Mark didn't stop her. Didn't help her either. She flew. Banked left, slow and deliberate. Flaps adjusted. Wind buffering the cockpit like fists. The cabin behind them had gone silent, the kind of quiet that only existed when everyone was listening for doom. But Evelyn didn't panic. She followed the checklist by heart. She thought fast. Moved faster. And when they landed, hard but safe, on a backup runway just 23 minutes later, the tires screeching like they were begging for mercy. It was her hands on the yoke, her voice calling in the mayday, her command that brought them down safe. In the stunned silence of the cockpit, Mark finally turned to her. You. But Evelyn was already powering down systems, and for the first time since the academy, Mark Reynolds had no words. The cabin was too quiet for too long. Then the clapping began. It started in row 12. Someone with a southern accent shouted, "Hell of a landing!" Then came row 9, row 3. By the time the last tire hissed to a halt on the emergency runway, the entire plane had erupted in applause. Some stood. Others wiped their faces. A teenager near the rear sobbed into his hoodie, and somewhere up front, someone yelled over the noise. "Who flew that?" "Captain Reynolds," a man asked loudly. Was that him? Mark hadn't moved. He sat in the left seat, still staring straight ahead like the windshield held some answer he'd lost track of. The red engine warning light had dimmed, but the ghost of it still hovered in the corners of Evelyn's vision. Her hand was still on the throttle. Her headset buzzed with the static of ground control, waiting for final acknowledgement. She gave it. Flight 1423, full stop on runway 26 left, emergency resolved, standing by for tow. Then she looked at Mark. He didn't meet her eyes, Outside, the fire trucks were already approaching, sirens off but lights spinning. A safety formality, a ritual after near disaster. Inside, the flight attendants tried to calm the passengers, but there was no panic anymore, only awe. "I think they want to know who kept them alive," Evelyn said quietly. Mark exhaled slowly through his nose. She thought for a second he might say nothing. Let the mystery hang. Let assumptions fall in his favor, as they always had. But instead he reached for the PA system with fingers that trembled ever so slightly. The cabin speaker crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mark began, his voice forced calm. "This is your captain speaking. As many of you are aware, we experienced a mechanical failure mid-flight, one that required an immediate emergency landing." A pause. Evelyn watched his jaw flex. "I want to personally thank our first officer, Evelyn Harris, who handled the incident with exceptional skill and precision. She took command when it mattered most." He released the button. Silence. Then, cheering. Louder than before. It moved through the cabin like a tide breaking. "Evelyn!" someone yelled from first class. "Damn right she did." A child pressed his face to the cockpit door's reinforced glass, grinning wide. One of the attendants turned, smiled through the opening, and gave Evelyn a thumbs up. She blinked, suddenly unsure what to do with her hands. Mark sat back, shoulders heavy. He didn't say another word. He didn't need to. For once, the story had left his grasp. Evelyn removed her headset, her fingers trembling from something other than adrenaline now. Her eyes burned, sharp at the edges. She blinked fast, but the tears still blurred the edges of the panel. She'd trained for this, fought for this, survived for this. And now, the people who doubted her the most, Mark, the whisperers, the clipboard judges, had to watch a plane full of strangers applaud her name. Outside, medics cleared the runway. No one had been hurt. The aircraft would be towed, inspected, written up in flight logs. But what Evelyn had done, what she'd proven, wouldn't be buried in a checklist. As passengers began to disembark, some paused at the cockpit door. "Thank you, ma'am," an elderly man said, removing his cap. "You saved my daughter," a woman whispered, teary-eyed. A young girl clutched a paper napkin scribbled with crayons. A plane, a sky, and a stick figure woman in the cockpit. Evelyn took it with a stunned smile. Claire texted as soon as the emergency broadcast hit the ATC feed. "You really flew through the storm." Literally. Back inside the cockpit, Mark finally stood. He straightened his uniform jacket, but the authority in his posture had thinned. He looked down at Evelyn one last time, searching perhaps for something he could still use. But there was nothing left to take. She had earned the sky, and everyone knew it. He walked out. Not a word. Evelyn stayed seated, just for a moment longer, letting the applause echo in her bones, and knowing, without doubt, that the war he started was no longer his to finish. It started with a video. A passenger in 14A had filmed the landing through the window. Evelyn's emergency touchdown, framed by stormlight and silence. No screaming, no chaos. Just the trembling calm of survival, the hard kiss of tires against wet asphalt, and the moment when the cabin burst into applause. Within hours, the footage had made its way onto aviation forums, news clips, and social media threads with captions like, "First officer saves entire flight." "The woman behind the yoke." "Hero in the co-pilot seat." Evelyn didn't read the comments, but Claire did. "3 separate instructors sent me the clip," she said, leaning across the break room table, "and 2 of them used the word textbook. You know how rare that is?" Evelyn stirred her tea slowly. "I didn't fly it to make a textbook." "You flew it like you wrote one." The next morning, Evelyn slipped the thick envelope into a secure inter-office drop outside the operations director's office. No fanfare, no signature, just the truth. The file was labeled plainly, Re. Reynolds. Flight record discrepancies and professional misconduct. She didn't wait to see who picked it up. She didn't need to. By the end of the week, word trickled through the pilot's lounge like oil across a hangar floor. Reynolds had been grounded pending review. Not officially fired. Not yet. But suspended. Pulled from flight schedules. His locker cleared out quietly. He didn't say goodbye. He never would. Daniel found her on the tarmac that afternoon, the light golden and slanting low, throwing long shadows across the concrete. "You know they're calling you Hurricane Harris in the training halls?" Evelyn turned, eyebrows raised. Daniel smiled faintly. "Apparently, nothing shakes the cockpit once you're in it." She scoffed. "They weren't saying that 2 months ago." "No, but they're saying it now." He stepped closer. "You know, a decade ago, I fought to get a single woman admitted into our top-track simulation stream. Half the board said it would change the environment." He paused. "You changed it anyway, and you didn't need permission." Evelyn looked out over the runway. A jet lifted into the air in the distance, trailing a silver whisper of vapor. "It wasn't just me." Daniel nodded once. "No, but it wouldn't have happened without you." Later, Evelyn sat alone in the cockpit of a grounded trainer jet, her old familiar. The same model she'd once flown with shaking hands, counting heartbeats and checklist items in the dark. Now it felt smaller, or maybe she had simply grown. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a battered leather badge holder, her father's. Inside, tarnished but intact, was his pilot's wings. The pin had dulled with time, but the shape was the same. The metal felt warm in her palm. "I flew today, Dad," she whispered. Not the landing, not the emergency. She meant the way the crew looked at her now. The quiet nods from other pilots. The way a young trainee in the hall had stuttered, then asked if she'd sign his checklist for good luck. She'd flown higher than fear. Past politics. Past sabotage. She'd flown into the place where she belonged. The cockpit lights flicked on overhead as someone powered up another sim nearby. Evelyn clipped her father's wings beside her own on her ID lanyard. One pair earned, the other inherited. The door opened behind her. Claire stepped in, holding 2 cups of terrible vending machine coffee. A habit now. "You good?" she asked. Evelyn nodded, but her voice cracked a little. "Better than good." Claire handed over the coffee. "They're asking if you want to help run next semester's emergency protocol module." "Me?" Evelyn blinked. "You." She stared down at the 2 sets of wings on her chest. One a ghost, one a scar. Then she smiled. "Tell them I'm airborne."